What Jesus has invited the disciples to do last week and invites us to do, to forgive in this way, is not easy. It's a hard thing to lean into, and that's really the impetus between what we're going to talk about today is the disciples' response to that. But before we get there, one of the things that I found interesting as I started to engage this topic this week was something it's kind of considered a simple principle of the economics. It's an economic theory principle. And so you get people in this room that are good in the economic world. What I'm about to say is really overly simplistic compared to what you know. But it's a frame that I think we often bring to the table. And it's this idea that in economics there's this idea of scarcity. And the idea of scarcity is that there's unlimited wants, but limited resources to get those wants. So this happens on individual levels, this happens on business levels, this happens on governmental levels, and this happens on worldwide economy levels. There's these unlimited potential wants, but a limited amount of resources to get those wants. In our personal lives, one of the ways that this pops up is time. Time is scarce. And when I'm spending it by doing my job and putting hours in at work, I'm not spending it at home, or I'm not spending it doing something else. I'm choosing to spend that time there. And there's a limited amount of it, so how I choose to spend it is pretty significant. One that I'm feeling very, very directly today is sleep. I'm the type of person that sleeps really well, except for randomly. I have nights that feel like full-on insomnia, and that was last night. 4:30, I look at the clock, I'm like, are you serious? So today is one of those days that I'm feeling that, man, sleep is sometimes a scarce resource. We need it so badly. And when we don't get enough, it's pretty noticeable. Hopefully it's not noticeable to you guys today. Finances, both on an individual family level, on a business level, on a governmental level, there's a limited amount of resources available to most of us. Some people don't live in that world, but the majority of human beings have a limited amount of resources available to, and a list of wants and needs, and they have to decide how to allocate those resources best. This idea of scarcity. And one of the dangers of scarcity is just a fact in a lot of areas of life, but one of the dangers of it is when you combine scarcity with fear and anxiety, we often turn towards hoarding. John D. Rockefeller is considered the richest American to ever live. The amount of money he had versus how much the U.S. had at that time is a larger percentage than any person in American history. And a reporter asked him one time, how much money is enough? And he said, a little bit more. And a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. The richest man in our country's history is yeah, but I don't have quite enough yet. When we have this scarcity mindset, it becomes a thing that we never feel like there's enough to do it. This morning, what we're going to live into is this idea of a scarcity question, but it's not about time, money, sleep, or land. It's about our faith. And whether or not the disciples are asking this question in this passage of whether or not Jesus had given them enough faith to do the things he was asking them to do. Do I have enough faith to actually be obedient to the things God is calling me to do? The disciples were asking questions that resonate with me, and I think probably resonate with you at different times, of how much faith do I need to actually be faithful to God? When do I know I have enough faith? How will I know that I've reached a level of faith that I think I need to reach, so then I'll be faithful to those things he's calling me to? And if I'm honest, when I look at the obedience in my life, if I use that as the measuring stick to my faithfulness, where I see and feel like I know what God is calling me towards, and my obedience to that, I see I'm often answering that question kind of like John D. Rockefeller. I just need a little bit more faith, God, and then I'll be obedient. Then I'll do that thing you're leading me towards. Just a little bit more. And it becomes this thing where I look at God as like he's operating with a scarcity mindset. I'm bringing this understanding that exists in our world, in this finite world now, and then placing it upon God as if there's this scarce amount of faith that he's willing to dole out, and he just hasn't given me enough yet. When the scriptures are filled, they begin in Genesis 1 with a liturgy of abundance. And all throughout the scriptures, we see God as the God of abundance that gives and gives and gives. When we look at Luke 17 this morning, we'll see that the problem here is that we're asking, the disciples were, and we often do, we ask the wrong question. The question is Do I have enough faith? Jesus, can you give me more faith? But the reality is that's just misunderstanding completely how this operates. And our bottom line this morning is this: following Jesus is not about the amount of your faith. It's acting on the faith you have. Following Jesus, being obedient to the things he has for you, is not about having the right, perfect amount of faith. It's about acting on the faith you actually have. This morning, we're going to pick up where Cameron left off in the middle of chapter 17. In chapters 15 and 16, Jesus had been talking to a crowd of people. There was Pharisees and his disciples. There was people who were committed to him and those who were super cynical of him. And he talks about this inclusive love that God goes after all people who are lost and wants to bring them back in. He talks about the Pharisees' love of money and how it's twisting their theology and the way they expect God to work. And at the beginning of 17, the audience shifts, and Jesus moves from talking to the whole crowd to talking to just the disciples. And so the words he has in chapter 17, what we read last week about forgiveness, what we're going to read today, starting in verse 5, is meant for those who are following Jesus, both in the first century and for you and I today. These are characteristics and values that are true of those who are following Jesus. So we pick this up in verse 5. The apostle said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." He replied, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it will obey you. Suppose one of you has a servant plowing or looking after the sheep. Will he say to the servant when he comes in from the field, 'Come along now, sit down and eat'? Won't he rather say, 'Prepare my supper, get yourself ready and wait on me while I eat and drink. After that you may eat and drink'? Will he thank the servant because he did what he was told to do? So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, 'We are unworthy servants, we have only done our duty.'" So when the disciples are confronted with this opportunity or this command to extend radical forgiveness towards people, they feel unable to even imagine how they could do it. This is one of those things that, like, when we read it, forgiving people over and over and over again sounds like something I probably should do. It sounds like something that would even probably be beneficial to my life, but I don't think I can actually do this, Jesus. I don't think you know how hard this is, Jesus. And so the disciples' first move is say, "Can we have some more faith? Jesus, if you would just give us some more faith, a stronger sense of belief, more certainty that this won't backfire on me. If you give us more faith, then it'll be so much easier to do the things you're asking us to do, to forgive people, to love our enemies, to do these things. Jesus, just a little bit more faith, and then we'll be able to do those things." And Jesus responds, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you'll be able to tell this mulberry tree to uproot itself and be planted in the sea, and it will do it." His response is really fascinating to me because he mixes some pictures that he uses all throughout the Gospels, this of mustard seed faith and something being thrown into the sea. And in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's parables where Jesus talks about if you have the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, a really small seed that is packed with insane potential. And when that tree goes towards its desired end, when it meets its full potential, it becomes a tree with a massive canopy that tons of creatures will be able to find habitat safety in. The kingdom of God is like this thing that begins really small and is packed with potential and provides safety and habitat and community for tons in the end. In both Matthew and Mark, he talks at different times about if you just had mustard seed faith, you'd be able to tell this mountain to move and it would into the sea and it would do so. And here he says the same thing about a mulberry tree. And what Jesus is doing is he's using concrete things in front of them that are right in front of their eyes to make points. In Matthew and Mark, when he says, if you had faith like this, you could move a mountain, they're literally standing on top of mountains when he says it. Like if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could move this, tell this mountain to go to the sea, and it would. And in Luke, they're journeying from Galilee down to Jerusalem towards Jesus' end of his life. And they're going through all these villages, and most likely he comes to a place where they say, increase our faith, and he looks over and he said, if you had faith as small as a mustard seed, you could tell that tree to go into the sea and it would listen. Jesus is taking these pictures, these realities all around them and making points by drawing just like pictures from what they already know and see. In the passage today, the disciples' request seems reasonable, doesn't it? Increase our faith. I've prayed that prayer a lot of times. Jesus, a little more faith. I want to be more faithful. Just give me a little bit more. I don't have enough. Give me more. Then I'll be able to do the things I know you want me to do. Then I'll be able to do the things it seems like you're leading me to do. Just give me a little bit more. It's a request that seems totally reasonable and normal to us. But Jesus doesn't give them more faith. His response is actually filled with a little bit of snark. He gives them this example where he basically says, you guys are missing the point completely. This is not about an amount of faith. That's not how faith works. You don't need to level up. It's not something that works like that. The gap between your faith that you currently have and loving your enemies and forgiving people and taking up your cross daily and following me, the gap in between there is your obedience, not more faith. The gap in between there is your willingness to take active steps of faith into what seems like a risk, what seems like counterintuitive, what seems really unsure on how it's going to work out for you. That's the gap in between your faith and forgiveness, your faith and loving people well. You don't need more. You need to act on what you already have. When we read about mustard seed faith, we get drawn in by that smallness picture, and it's easy for us to think in terms of a quantity or a level. Look, if I just had the right amount of faith or a right amount of pure, unadulterated faith without doubt mixing in, then I could do these seemingly impossible things like put mountains and trees in the ocean. But I think what Jesus is doing here is he's giving them ridiculous pictures to prove how off-base they are. He's not saying like, man, if your faith gets stronger, you'll be able to walk around and tell trees to go live in the ocean. They'll be like, well, that doesn't make sense. He's like, right, just like your question doesn't make sense. You're approaching this completely wrong. A mustard seed is this little seed that's filled with potential towards a desired end, becoming this tree where people can find flourishing under. And your faith, in the same way, has a desired end. You becoming more like Jesus and being part of the work God is doing to bring the kingdom of God here and now. And we do that as we step out in obedience and step out in the faith we already have. The faith that the disciples needed, the faith that we need, is not one which, if we had enough of it, we could do spectacular and ludicrously magical things. It's not what faith is about. The faith that the disciples need, they already possess. The missing power is just in their lack of taking the step. That's where it's missing. And the same is true of us. We have all the faith we need to be faithful. Even if it feels insignificantly small like a mustard seed, we have what we need to be faithful. But taking those steps is really difficult. Following Jesus is not about the amount of your faith. It's acting on the faith you already have. So after he gives the disciples this ridiculous picture of a tree being planted in the sea, he tells a little story that is just a common cultural situation. He asks them, can you imagine a servant that would be so patronizing as to walk in and demand that his master feed him? Or to require him to give thanks or have this expectation of thanks for just doing the thing he was supposed to do? And Jesus is using this situation because it would make sense to the disciples about the nature of a servant. This isn't a parable where we're supposed to draw direct lines like God is the master here and he wants us to feel like unworthy servants. That's not what's going on here at all. What's going on here is, and the point is all in the posture, the correct posture of the servant. Some of the cultural context when we get to these kind of stories feels a bit funny for us today, or at least I think it should feel a bit funny for us today, because it has to do with masters and slaves and servants, and we live in a different world ethically than Jesus did. And I think that should feel funny to us. In other places in the New Testament, those relationships start to get redefined. But that's not what Jesus is trying to do here. Jesus is just using this common cultural understanding, a household with a couple servants, to illustrate the posture of a servant towards a master. A servant was wholly devoted to his master. His whole life oriented around doing what the master had for him. And in the picture that Jesus gives us, the negative example is the one who comes in and demands a meal or is expecting thanks. The servant's coming in with a sense of entitlement that, culturally speaking, would have put the servant above the master, and now the master is in debt to the servant. The servant would bring this expectation to the table where now he's dictating the roles in the relationship. What Jesus is saying is that we have enough faith to be faithful already. We don't need to walk in with expectations that we need more than we already have. Our duty is to exercise our faith from a place of gratitude that the faith we already have is a gift, and obedience into the roles and the things he has for us. So what does it mean for us today then? What does it mean to be a servant today? What does it look like for us to be wholly devoted to Jesus? I'd submit to you that it's probably a lot smaller and simpler than we often think. It looks a lot more ordinary than we often think. It's tempting to jump to large stories of massive impact, crazy faithfulness where there's tons of tension and suspense and jaw-dropping results. We are enthralled with stories of spectacular faithfulness, massive revivals, big miracles. We're enthralled by those stories, and the danger of those stories isn't that they exist, is that they cause us to think that our little steps of faithfulness aren't enough. I wonder if these stories sometimes serve as like mulberry tree moments for us. Is this ludicrously amazing example that we like, oh, if only I could do that, then I'd be faithful, then I'd have enough faith to do the things that are actually in front of me. When it's like these stories, that's not the point, and that's not how it works in your life. Jesus is reminding the disciples that faith isn't manifested in flashy magic tricks or pointless self-congratulatory displays of power, but in daily acts of faithfulness. Simple acts of duty to God that grow the kingdom, one small moment of grateful obedience at a time. Faithfulness at home, in your marriage, with your kids, with your friends, with your neighbors. Faithfulness in your job and the way you do your actual job and the way you relate to the other humans you're working with. Faithfulness in the things that are already there right in front of you. We get numb by big, spectacular moments saying, I couldn't do that, and that's fine, you don't have to. Do the thing that's right in front of you. I think like the disciples, we have this struggle and this ability to bring attitudes and expectations towards God. Ways that we think he should work. Ways that we'd be able to know he's working in our lives, and if he meets those expectations, then we could be faithful. And in the end, we're bringing entitlements. We're saying, God, as long as you work in this way and show up in this way, I'll know you're here and you're working, and then I'll be faithful. And just like the servants in the story, we end up flipping that paradigm, flipping that contract and saying, God, as long as you meet me in this way, then I'll obey you. And I believe there's lots of different expectations and lots of different ways that we can bring entitlement into how we expect God to work in our lives. There's more of them happening in this room than I could possibly name. And so I'm going to name two that I'm noticing that are very prevalent in my life. And I hope by naming those two, that yours may come to the surface a little bit for you. Maybe you'll agree with mine. Maybe you'll think they're lame. But I'm hoping that that starts to serve something where you see when you have this temptation to do it. Because I think we do it subconsciously as much as we do it consciously. Place some expectation above God. For me, the first one is that my faith and the fruit of my faith will always have a positive, noticeable, successful trajectory. That I have this temptation, this thing that God, like if I'm following you directly, it should be really noticeable to me and the people around me. Like there should be this upward and to the right trajectory to it. I think this existed for all of humanity, that we've kind of had this want and desire. But I think in our age today, it's stronger than it's been in a long time. Because I really believe that if a cowboy was kind of the American picture of a hero back hundreds of years ago, that the entrepreneur that is killing it is our hero today. That's not bashing entrepreneurs or successful people. But we take stories of people and businesses that seem to rise out of insignificance, and they seem to have this upward mobility and this trajectory, like, man, look at them. So we read books and we listen to podcasts, and when we study their habits and say, what do they do differently than I'm doing in my life? And maybe if I mimic those things, then I'll have that upward mobility. My life will be up and to the right. And then we bring that to our faith as if God is actually working in my life, it'll look like this always. And when I read through the scriptures and I look at my own life, that is not usually the case. When we do this, the only time we view God as blessing us is when we are successful by some standard we create. That's God blessing us. Clearly, if God's working in my life, it should be upward and to the right, and everyone would notice how great he is. Yeah. I'm tempted to do this in my faith a lot. I think we do this when we talk about churches in general. A numerically growing church must be a sign of God's blessing. Must be a sign that God is at work in that church. And one that's stagnant or declining or shrinking or is just kind of like quietly faithful, God's not at work there. If he is at work, clearly it would be just going up and to the right. Man, if God is at work, we'd have massive impact, and we'd have viral videos all over social media, and people would recognize how great our impact is and therefore see how great God is. Small, stagnant, shrinking churches where faithfulness isn't flashy. Where's the God of the upward and to the right in that? If we buy into this entitlement that God, that if you're working in my life, it'll look spectacular. And I think we do this in the way, and this is something I'm extremely guilty of, that I relate to church as a family. Often we're tempted to use the church as a tool that helps us achieve the goals we want in our lives. Coming to church, our faith in why we engage this space is another tool in our bag of achieving the goals we want for our lives, whether that's spiritually, whether that's relationally, whether that's emotionally. And it just sits there as like one of the tools that we can choose. In the year and a half in between working here in my previous pastoring position, I had a year and a half outside of working in churches, I couldn't pick a church. If you want to know about churches in the Lake Country, I can tell you about pretty much every one of them, because I visited most of them. But when I went in there, I had this dream church in my mind of the way a church should operate. I had this picture of this is what a good church would look like. And I walked in the door and instantly well, that's not enough, and he shouldn't have said it that way, and can you believe they do that way? And week after week, dragging my family along, not enough, not good enough, doesn't measure up to my standard. This isn't clearly good enough. But then Crosspoint came along and checked all my boxes. That's a complete lie. The process of me coming to work at Crosspoint was me reckoning with this idol that I had made of a dream church. And as I engaged conversations and prayed about it, it became more and more clear that there's some providential things happening. Yeah, this is the next thing for you. And it's like, but it doesn't measure up to all these things I said, God. These are the important things, God. If they're not doing those things, how can I be a part of it? It forced me to reckon with my idol of a dream church. In 2019, where we get to customize every part of our lives, our social media feeds, our Netflix streaming, we get to pick everything we like in every other area of life. We bring that to the church. And it's not a new thing. In the late 1930s, early 1940s, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a pastor and theologian in Germany, wrote this in his book, Life Together. Those who love their dream of a Christian community more than they love the Christian community itself become destroyers of that Christian community, even though their personal intentions may be ever so honest, earnest, and sacrificial. God hates this wishful dreaming because it makes the dreamer proud and pretentious. Those who dream of this idolized community demand that it be fulfilled by God, by others, and by themselves. They enter the community of Christians with their demands set up by their own law and judge one another and God accordingly. It is not we who build, Christ builds the church. Whoever is mindful to build the church is surely well on the way to destroying it, for he will build a temple of idols without wishing or knowing it. We must confess that he builds. We must proclaim that he builds. We must pray to him and he will build. We do not know the plan. We cannot see whether he is building or pulling down. And it may be that the times which by human standards are the times of collapse are for him the great times of construction. It may be that the times for which from a human point are great times for the church are times when it's pulled down. It's a great comfort which Jesus gives to his church. You confess, you preach, You bear witness to me, and I alone will build where it pleases me. Do not meddle in what is not your providence. Do what is given to you and do it well, and you will have done enough. Live together in the forgiveness of your sins. Forgive each other every day from the bottom of your hearts. Man. This is really difficult for me because for you guys, most of you, your connection to our community is on Sundays and then maybe some different little bits of times throughout the week. And so you're bringing some idolized maybe visions to the church. I spend my entire week here. So if I'm operating out of these idealized, wrong narratives and not recognize that Jesus is the one building it, my job is to be faithful in the wrong things, I will blow this place up. I could ruin it. Not recognizing it's my job to be faithful. It's his job to build. And what it looks like when he builds, I don't know. It doesn't always make sense to human eyes. In the past 2 years-ish that I've been here, I came in November of 17. I think I've been challenged and stretched and beat down and built up and encouraged and pushed forward more than any other season of faith I have. There's a chance there's some recency bias in there. But irregardless of that, I have been what's happened in my life, the transformation that's happened because I was willing to enter in and try to take the next steps forward instead of looking and building my own thing. It was a temptation. I'll just start a church that's exactly how I want it. None of you would have liked it, but I would have been happy. Oh, this dream of this upward to the right church, it will always look like that. It's an entitlement that it will always leave us disappointed. Always leave us disappointed. The other main one, entitlement that I have to reckon with on a regular basis is that of certainty. God, if you could just give me a bit more certainty, then I could be more faithful. A bit more certainty that you really are behind all of this. A bit more certainty that this next step that I sense is the right step for me. A little bit more certainty that if I do take that step, it's going to go pretty well for me. If you could just give me a little bit more certainty, God, get rid of all this doubt, just make it perfectly clear to me, then I will be faithful. One Old Testament scholar says it this way: we all have a hunger for certitude. The problem is the gospel is not about certitude, it's about fidelity. The gospel is not about certitude, it's about fidelity, it's about faithfulness. The gospel is about a God who is faithful to us, that even though we turned our backs, he still pressed in, he still gave himself, that we could be in relationship to him and our faithfulness in return. The gospel is not about black and white certainty. It's about faithfulness. I think most of us are probably tempted at times to think, if I only had more faith, if I was only absolutely sure, then I could do something important. Then I could do something impressive. Then I wouldn't struggle with doubt. Then I wouldn't be scared. I'd be appreciated. I'd know that I am finally right. I know that I have it exactly figured out. It would all finally make sense to me. Our faith journeys often begin with this type of certainty. Like that's stage one. When I've read a bunch of books on the stages of faith, both from a Christian and in other, like all across religion's perspective. And stage one always is really black and white and certain. But you're not supposed to stay at stage one. But that certainty is what led me to go to Bible college. A Bible college that loved certainty and didn't like questions. That certainty is what made me think, maybe I should do like this pastoring gig. That wasn't in my family's story. I didn't know anything about it. But as my life has gone, I'm a person who loves to ask questions. I'm not really good at finding answers. I love to ask really hard questions, and I started to look at this faith that I had built, this perfect box of a system that I boxed God into, and I started to see all the holes in it. And I have these seasons in my life where almost all the certainty seems to disappear, and I'm left with this really small things that I'm certain of. And I'm like, God, but I need more than that to be faithful. This little core thing isn't enough. I need more certainty than that to be faithful. I need to know exactly how this is going to go. But the gospel isn't about certainty. It's about faithfulness. In these seasons of doubt, I can spend so much emotional and spiritual and psychological and even physical energy trying to regain the certainty of my early faith. Yet the more people I talk to have walked the road ahead of me, the more I read of the historical church's journeys, the more I realize the certainty I feel entitled to is often a thing that I used to not be faithful. The certainty that I feel entitled to, that God, you owe this to me, is just one of the things I use to not take those steps of faith. The certainty I desire is about as useful as a mulberry tree being planted in the ocean. It's just not the point of it. One author writes, the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. Faith and doubt live together very well. The opposite of faith is certainty. Certainty is missing the point entirely. Faith includes noticing the mess, the emptiness, and the discomfort, and letting it be there until some light returns. Faith moves into the brokenness in this world and looks at the just completely, seemingly incomprehensible brokenness all around us, leans into it and sits in it until they notice the light shining through it. Doesn't come up with a systematic, perfect formula for why it happens. You're always going to be left wanting more. That formula doesn't exist. When seasons of questioning and doubts seem oppressively strong, it's important to know that this is not new, that this is the journey of faith. This is the journey of faith. Most often what we need in the midst of our doubts and fears is not increased faith or an increased sense of certainty. It's faithfulness. It's taking the next right step. Our desire for certainty, our desire for an increased faith can keep us from working with what we already have. Jesus, just give me more. Man, you have enough. You have enough. Just exercise it. Exercise it. Be obedient. I think it's important to reckon with our entitlements. The things that we kind of set up as subconscious contracts, the way that God's supposed to interact with us. And see the bad news behind them. The up and to the right is just the bad news of I am what I do, and if I'm not doing great things, then God must not be connected to me. And God says, you're enough. You're enough because I love you. Because you're my child. And there's nothing upward, downward, right or left you could do that's going to change that. Certainty. Just a little bit more. God, please, please, please make it so certain. Help me to not have these fears and doubts. Yeah, take a step. Be obedient. The belonging and connection and desires that you're looking for are found as you're faithful, not as you sit and stew in it. Bring your doubts to Jesus. He can handle them. So how do we do this? I think it starts with recognizing like that the faith you have, the faith that I have is already a gift from God. It's a gift. We can live in this world as people who are thankful that our God is a God whose gospel is one of relationship and one of faithfulness, that he leaned in and pursued us even as we stiff-armed him. And he's sitting there waiting with open arms to welcome us back. Not with shame, not condemning, but saying, man, what I have for you is so much better. Join me in this. Lay down these entitlements. Get to the bad news behind the entitlement and trust my good news pushing through it. We often act as if God's holding out on us. That if there's a scarcity that exists in the amount of faith he's willing to give us, there's a bucket of faith and he's given it to everybody else and we didn't get quite enough. It's just the wrong question. Our God is the God of abundance. He's given you the faith you need. Following Jesus is not about the amount of your faith. It's about being active with the faith you already have. So this morning, if you know what God is calling you to do, what he's inviting you to do this week, you're hearing the good news he has for you. Lean into that and ignore the next things I say. Don't use these as another way to ignore the things that God is asking you to do in your life. For the rest of us, here's a couple questions of homework for this week that I'd love for you to engage. First is this. Is there an area of your life where God is inviting you to take an active step of faith instead of waiting until you have increased faith. You know the thing he's been asking you to do. It's most likely an ordinary part of your life, not something ginormous and extravagant. You know the step he's asking you to take. Take it. Take an active step. Trust him. Secondly, is there an area of your life where you are bringing entitlement to how you expect God to work in your life? What is the entitlements you're bringing? The contracts you're putting before him? What does it look like to flip and operate as a grateful servant in face of that this week? I encourage you to talk through these things with friends and family this week over dinners and coffees. Pray about it, try and discern what God might be up to in your life, and consider coming back and sharing next week. It's a highlight of our week every week to hear how God is working in your lives. Would you guys stand with me as we close in prayer? Jesus, thank you that you're good. Thank you that the gospel is one of faithfulness, not one of me needing to prove myself. I pray this week as we leave that you would help us to take steps of faith. No matter how big or small you're calling us, that we would take those active steps of faith with what we already have, knowing that it's a gift. We'd live as grateful, obedient servants of you. Help us to notice the entitlements and the subconscious things that we're bringing to the table that often cause us to sit back and wait when you're calling us forward. Continue to guide us to bring healing and joy to our lives. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Thank you guys. Have an awesome week.